Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Tuesday, September 2nd, 2025, episode 479, and we're going to talk about the end of white privilege. Finally, unfortunately. But anyway, gold and silver has been making some news. Silver has not been this high since 2011, and before that in 1980. Of course, one must also consider inflation. And so, although it is up above $40, it probably in actual dollar terms, we still have a ways to go to match the high of those two previous periods. However, gold has never been this high at 3,500. So we'll see. But it's not, and something that I'm sure all of you already know, but it's not that the value of gold and silver are going up, but rather that the value of the dollar is going down. And that is because there's too much money printing, right? The money supply is increasing at an obscene rate. And so this brings me to a topic I discussed in episode 13 and 65, right? This is sort of my bread and butter, race theory, and I talked about white privilege in episode 13 and then dollar privilege in episode 65. I'm going to take a different tack, review and take a different tack. So if you studied race theory or studied anything related to race in the humanities in university recently, then you'll know that privilege is a big topic. And that white privilege used to be the rallying cry of, I don't know what you would call it. We'll call it race theorists and people who have been touched by race theorists about 10 or 20 years ago, right? So white privilege first came on the scene in the late 1980s, I believe, and then the 1990s, that's when postmodernism really took off and people started going crazy with the with the with sort of this deconstruction and really solidifying this idea of white supremacy, etc. Well, interestingly, this whole idea of white privilege, gender privilege, has been pushed out by the LGBTQ plus wave. And this should not be sort of conflated with the others because really it's a different kind of agenda that stands above previous ones because it is completely a farcical, right? A farce because it has pushed out feminism. It doesn't really acknowledge bisexual, right? That's the whole idea of trans is that there are multiple sexes, and yet within the LGBTQ plus, you have contradictions. And so as long as you don't look too closely, then you can maintain this facade, this fakery about everyone LGBTQ plus being unified with each other because they don't. They stab each other in the back all of the time. Or they don't talk to each other and you don't talk about each other in the same conversation. Otherwise, you run into contradiction and hypocrisy very quickly. So before all of this, people would focus on color-based race, which seems kind of silly now, but nevertheless, that was the easiest way to rally lots of people, to guilt trip a lot of people, to convince a lot of people that what they were seeing could be explained by white privilege. So white privilege, you may have heard it before, but the way race theory explains white privilege is based on this perception of a racialization or a racial category of white, right? So if you look like you're white, then you have white privilege. And I'm very careful with saying it that way because there are, of course, some people who are not quote unquote white, but they could pass as white. And so therefore they also have white privilege. And I'm not talking about, well, anyway, just keep it simple, okay? Because there's a bigger topic to discuss. So, as with all generalizations, there are exceptions, and that's how I'll leave it, right? And that's why race theory done in this way is really bad. It's full of holes, full of contradiction, which is why they go as fast as they do when they talk to you about it, how they have at least 15 minutes of words to say to make sure that you're overwhelmed with words, that you have no opportunity to respond. There's no way for you to push back unless you're patient enough to wait 15 minutes. And sometimes it's 2 hours, right? So most people don't have that kind of time and patience to wait them out. But that's why they always have this sort of prepackaged list of things that they'll scream in your face so that you can't push back against it. But this whole idea of white privilege is based on a carefully crafted, well, not even carefully, shouldn't say that, a crafted perception of certain situations where it seems that whites dominate this area of life. Now, yes, there are many areas where whites do not dominate, but they don't bring those up, right? They are only going to focus on certain situations that they have targeted, where it is extremely easy to make the argument, right? And I mean, if you were really concerned about white privilege, then you have to look at the entire society. And when you look at the entire society, then you'll see people like J.D. Vance, right, who came from the Appalachians, right? So you have the poor whites, right? You can't think of them when you talk about white privilege because it fails, right? Some people might even say, "Oh, J.D. Vance was able to rise to become vice president because of his privilege." Well, then explain Barack Obama, right? And so there are holes everywhere. Okay. However, when you learn about white privilege at first, you're going to learn about specific situations where whites have dominated, whites have gotten away with crime, et cetera, et cetera. So, what is privilege exactly? Well, privilege is explained to be unearned advantage. That's why it's a privilege, right? You didn't earn it, you just have it simply by virtue of being, in this case, white, right? Because you're white, chances are you have advantages that other people do not have. Now, people who have privilege, they deny having it, right? Because they point to their own hard work and they say, I earned it. All right. And this is supposed to be the red flag that if anyone says, I earned it, then it's problematic, especially when colored people do it, right? Because it's always supposed to be problematic. Okay. And because of privilege, you have power and you have influence. And so you can shape the world according to your own image. That would be white. Okay. Now, dollar privilege is pretty much the same, right? You have advantages by virtue of being the country that issues the dollar. You deny its existence. Most people don't even know that it exists, but they'll say they'll deny its existence. And so any argument that they make is legitimate. And the fact that the dollar does give everyone in the United States power and influence. And you might say, over whom, right? If you look at the poor in society, I don't know, the people in Appalachia, maybe, what kind of power do they have? Well, they live in the United States. That's the power that they have over all the other countries in the world. In other words, the United States is not going to bomb Appalachia. Okay. They might let it rot and fall into despair, but they won't get bombed, right? So they at least have that. All right. So dollar privilege gives people who live in America a lot of perks, opportunity that other people in other places of the world cannot get. I wonder if any of my old students, when they watch the news, think of me like, oh, wow, we talked about that years ago. That would be kind of cool. Anyway, uh, I did get an email from someone recently who said he took my class. I don't know, 6 years ago, and he said he enjoyed it a lot. So I love getting those emails. But anyway, I would even make the argument that dollar privilege is much, much bigger and better than white privilege, right? More people don't get to enjoy it, right? Not just people who are white, but everyone who lives in the United States of America. All right. So, in other words, and the reason why dollar privilege is greater than white privilege is because the only way we can talk about white privilege is because there's dollar privilege. Okay. The only way people can talk about microaggressions or LGBTQ plus, the only way we can have these discussions is because of dollar privilege. It's the privilege of printing dollars and requiring all the countries in the world to use it to buy anything anywhere else in the world. So if one country wants to buy oil from another country, well, they have to buy it in dollars. And so they have to go to their banker. The banker goes get dollars and then they make the exchange, right? And so this gives the dollar artificial demand, right? So the US needs to print even more in order to supply the dollars that other countries need in order to have transactions. But of course, by doing that, having all of these countries dependent on the United States was able to inflate beyond all of our imagination. The fact that we're looking at a running budget of 37 trillion and unfunded liabilities in the 200 trillion, well, this is all because of inflation. And because of all of this money printing, right, this artificial demand for dollars, the US has been able to buy off entire countries, right, bribe people with dollars because it had some measure of value. People still thought that the United States would pay its debts, et cetera, et cetera. But because it kept printing all of this money, all of these dollars, it hollowed out this country in terms of manufacturing, right? And we talked about this before, but all the manufacturing jobs went overseas. And as part of the financialization of the market. And so people would get jobs in finance, in stock market trade, and cryptos or whatever. So people are not making anything anymore, but they're dealing in dollars, borrowing and selling dollars, right? So inflation, all this money printing that we have in this country has created and enabled the welfare system. It has destroyed the family, destroyed cities with crime and cries of accusation of racism and sexism. All the inflation has fueled the growth of the university, filled with all of these left-wing professors who are going to perpetuate this idea of white privilege and systemic racism. But all of these schemes, everything that I just listed here, are just simply wealth transfer programs from the poor to the corrupt wealthy. And so it looks like you're helping people. It looks like you're fighting for justice, but really all you're doing is participating in this system which transfers wealth from everybody in this country to the corrupt insider wealthy. And that would be the bankers or people who are associated with favored industry in the United States, like weapons manufacturing. Okay. And so you're going to shift the wealth from the working poor, right? Even the middle class, you're going to steal their wealth through inflation and transfer it to all of these other people, right? In addition to paying taxes, right? So there's that. Now, once you have create all of this artificial wealth, right? All these people who are just rolling in dough, taking vacation or sort of quitting their jobs and then traveling the world, right? So this artificial wealth creates jealousy, right? There are a lot of people in the underclass who say, "Why can't I do that? Why, how is it they can do that? I can't." And, it must be racism. And so you have this underclass that's being taught by in the university and led by in these communities by Marxists, right? People who are communists and they're taught how to complain about oppression and injustice. And so when you're jealous and someone comes along and says, you know why that is because you're being oppressed, right? You're living in an unjust system. Most people, whether they believe it or not, they see it as an opportunity to get a piece of that pie. And so they see that wealth, they want it for themselves, and they participate in this socialistic, communistic, Marxist, uh, wealth transfer, right? Because it's not a redistribution, it's a transfer, okay? Because not everyone benefits equally through this system. So, but by participating in this, they're demonstrating their lack of understanding of economics and race theory, right? They want to plunder the rich, but they then wonder why their own lives keep getting harder and harder to live and maintain. And so their conclusion is, by their logic, is they have to protest harder. They have to raise taxes more, and then their lives get worse, and it means, well, we didn't go big enough last time, and so we got to do it even more. And 50, 70 years of this, what has gotten us what? A bankrupt country. That's what has gotten us. And people still want to go further down this road. It's just, it's insane, right? And that's how subjectivity, when taught in absence of competing theories in the university, right? That's why people like me in the university, we got to go, right? They cannot tolerate us because we're offering a different perspective on everything that's going on in the world. Can't have that because since their argument is the weaker one, when they go head to head in competition with a better argument, better perspective, they can't spread their gospel, right? Their gospel of oppression and racism and white privilege and stuff, right? And so since they're so narrow-minded, they can't see that they are the actual cause of their own misery and complaint. I'll give you an example. In my old university, striking grad students saw that in the previous year, the university had, I don't know, like over $150 million in surplus. And all the grad students, of course, they're communists, right? They're like, we want that, right? Right? Classic jealousy, right? And so they went on strike because they wanted a piece of that. Uh, but they fail to understand is that the money was already all spent. It was already allocated, right? There were all these other people were just waiting, chomping at the bit for that money. And what is it? I tried to tell my classes that a large chunk of it went to trying to establish a satellite campus somewhere else, which was absolutely absurd. But the money was already spent. So there was no money to get. And that's pretty much the situation that we live in now. All of this white privilege rhetoric, right? So they complain about white privilege, but really what they want is reparations. What they really want is more welfare, universal basic income, more war, more government. All of it is fueled by dollar privilege under the umbrella of something like white privilege. Obviously, white privilege has now been replaced by LGBTQ plus, right? It seems like we're fighting for LGBTQ, but really we're um, fighting for wealth transfer, right? That's really all it is. And so BRICS, which used to stand for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, right? This is coming together, right? And it's something that's still poo-pooed by a lot of people in the West. But if you look at the demographics, right, it's the majority of the world, right? The majority population of the world is now trying to get into and get a piece of the BRICS action. Western countries are not allowed to participate, right? They're like France has been trying to attend. I don't know if they were able to do so recently, but they're not allowed to come, right? In other words, countries are invited, but, but when certain countries try to go, they're like, no, you're not allowed to come. And those countries, of course, are all countries that have been touched by the United States, right? They're intimate trade partners or what do you call it, war partners with the United States, right? But because the United States has become so obnoxious and so just intolerable, it has pushed all of these countries together, countries that never used to talk to each other, right? That hated each other. Now they're talking, right? So I saw a video of the president of India, Russia, and China having a little powwow with their translators, all laughing their butts off, right? I mean, having a grand old time, Who's not there? United States, England, Germany. None of these guys are there. And then when they took a big group picture, like what I guess G7 would do, right? You see the president of Iran, all these countries that are being badmouthed by the United States, they're there. Okay. And you can see that there is a big power shift going on. And I've talked about this before, but now it's becoming so obvious. More and more people are talking about it. And it's the United States. The United States is most responsible for lighting a fire under their butts to get it going, to get it operational. And it's not perfect. But the systems are in part working, right? You see more and more countries trading directly with each other. There's no need to get dollars. And that means dollar demand is dropping, it's going through the floor. So all this debt we have in the United States is fueled by other countries giving their currency to buy US treasuries. So now they have dollars and they can use that to do trade, but now they don't need it. And instead, a lot of them are dumping their dollars, which means all that money printing, right? It has no place to go except back in the United States. And so we're going to look at a tsunami of dollars coming back to the United States, right? And so the other countries, what they have is not perfect. And, people in America are like, oh, they suck. They're so primitive. They're stupid. They're a bunch of, idiots, trying to do something as good as something that we have, right? I mean, this whole superiority complex that America has, it pretty much is racism, okay? Uh, you can try to say, I'm not racist. Oh, yes, you are, right? When you look down on other countries and you think that they're stupid, they're backwards, they're primitive, right? Because you've never been to their country, you've never studied their culture, anything like that. Yeah, well, yeah, that's part of the American arrogance. I have it too because I grew up in America, and that it came as a shock to me that I had it too because I suffered from discrimination when I was younger. But when it comes to looking at people from other countries, oh, I was basically the same. So I know what I'm talking about, right? Um, so peace, voluntary cooperation leads to innovation and development. That's what we're seeing in the BRICS countries, right? China, I've talked about the technological developments that China has had, right? And what are we doing in America? Trans stuff, right? That's our big innovation, right? No one wants it, right? And so we're ramming it down other people's throats, right? So America, with this bloated sense of self, this arrogance, and a healthy portion of racism, have basically looked down on all these other countries, said we're so superior that there's no way they can reach our level. But how do you reach this level? It's not because there is something unique about America as a race or as a people. Right? We hate each other here. It's the freedom, right? It was the freedom and voluntary cooperation which allowed people to innovate and create and make deals voluntarily to improve society. We've lost that, right? Especially with Trump doing 10% stake in Intel, right? Instead, we have the failed system taking over more systems in society. We have less freedom here. Right. I used to always say when we did race theory, I said, no race has a monopoly on stupid. All right. Which means then that no race, right, however you want to racialize them, has a monopoly on creativity, genius, success, wealth, right? No one, right? And you need freedom to unleash the creative power of people. And look, between China and India, between just those two countries, right? There are so many people who are dying just for the opportunity to be able to put their ideas into action, right? They so outnumber America. There's so many people there that are not concerned about the latest woke trend and what's on TikTok, but they are trying to figure out how to improve their society. That's why we're getting spanked on the global stage, right? The ruling class of America has urinated it all away, right, has done the number one and just trashed all of the history of this country, the freedom, the innovation, and creativity, just pissed it all away. When the dollar collapses because no one wants it anymore, and the U.S. has abused its privilege through sanctions, corruptions, war, threat, and theft, then there will hardly be anyone still crying about white privilege, right? People will be more focused on food privilege, housing privilege, heat in the winter privilege, right? Some people say that the decline of the United States will be like the decline of England, kind of gradually over decades. Some say that it'll be sudden and hard. No one really knows. This is uncharted waters. But my big fear is how the US government will react. War, nukes, right? Colonel McGregor, he's going up and down all these podcasts basically saying that the war with Iran is already written. The US is just trying to find a trigger, right? Which makes it kind of unbelievable considering we're about to invade Venezuela, right? So how are they going to do it with nukes? Oh, God. And the United States is like a wounded bear, very dangerous, unpredictable. So who knows? Now, personally, my mind always goes to the worst case scenario, and then I try to make preparations there. I could be wrong, but it doesn't hurt to hedge one's bets. Right. And so it's just an observation from some of the things that I saw today and the gold and silver price going up to highs we haven't seen in a long time. But for me, school starts tomorrow. I don't know how it'll go. It'll be quite interesting. So I don't know if I'll have an episode for the rest of this week. Nevertheless, I will endeavor to do so. So until the next time, I will talk to you later.